185,000 soldiers. The deadliest force of the ancient world, warriors of the mighty Assyrian Empire, stood poised on the brink of what seemed like certain victory. Their camp sprawled beneath the night sky, filled with the crackle of campfires and the sharp glint of weapons ready for the dawn assault. Confidence radiated through their ranks. They had crushed kingdoms, toppled walls, and made the nations tremble. To them, Jerusalem was just another target, a fragile city awaiting its inevitable doom. But the night was anything but ordinary. Beyond the flickering firelight, a silence deeper than fear settled over the camp. An unseen presence moved with purpose. A power neither sword nor shield could defend against. These soldiers, who had conquered nations, would soon face something far greater than any earthly army. In the stillness, an invisible line had been crossed. This wasn't just a siege, it was a direct challenge to the God of Israel, the King of Kings. Inside Jerusalem's walls, a different scene unfolded. King Hezekiah, a man whose faith burned brighter than the enemy's torches, had turned not to his own strength, but to Yahweh. With a prayer of desperation and trust, he laid the Assyrian threats before the Almighty, seeking divine intervention. The people of Judah, though surrounded by a vast enemy, clung to the promise spoken by the prophet Isaiah. The Lord would fight for them. Then it happened. In the dead of night, without warning, the angel of God swept through the Assyrian camp. No battle cries, no drawn swords, just silence. By morning, 185,000 soldiers lay lifeless where they had slept. The mightiest army in the world was utterly destroyed, not by human hands, but by the power of the living God. The invincible Assyrian Empire had been stopped in its tracks, leaving Jerusalem untouched, its walls standing as a testament to divine protection. This was more than a miraculous victory. It was a declaration of God's sovereignty, of his power to humble the proud, and of his faithfulness to those who trust in him. What led to this moment of divine judgment? How did Hezekiah's faith and leadership pave the way for such an extraordinary deliverance? And most importantly, what does this story teach us about facing the overwhelming battles in our own lives? Join us as we unravel the incredible events of that fateful night and uncover the timeless truths they reveal. Before we continue, I want to ask you to leave a like on the video to support us. And if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel and also click the notification bell. God bless you. The Assyrian Empire was not merely an ancient kingdom, it was a force that defined an era. With its roots in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, this empire controlled trade, knowledge, and vast territories. Its capital, Nineveh, stood as a testament to its grandeur and technological advancement, with palaces and walls that inspired awe and fear. However, Assyria's reputation was built on its unmatched military strategy and a cruelty so deliberate that it became a weapon in itself. The Assyrians waged war not just with swords, but with terror. Stories of cities annihilated, leaders impaled, and families torn apart spread long before their armies arrived. The goal was clear: to crush resistance before the first arrow was shot. Their military dominance came from innovations that seemed insurmountable. Siege engines towered above walls, battering rams crushed gates, and massive shields protected entire formations of archers. Their strategy was methodical, their conquest relentless. But what truly set them apart was their psychological warfare. They didn't just defeat enemies, they humiliated them, deported populations to destroy cultural unity, and desecrated temples to show that no god could stand against them. For the people of Jerusalem, this wasn't just a distant threat. With every city the Assyrians conquered, their shadow loomed larger. By the time they approached Jerusalem, they had already taken 46 fortified cities in Judah, including the key stronghold of Lachish. For those within Jerusalem's walls, it seemed that surrender was not just an option, it was inevitable. At the heart of this campaign was King Sennacherib, whose reign from 705 to 681 before Christ solidified Assyria's place as a superpower. Sennacherib was not merely a ruler, he was a strategist, a propagandist, and a figure of overwhelming arrogance. The Sennacherib Prism, a six-sided artifact that records his campaigns, highlights his capture of Judah's cities and his supposed victory over King Hezekiah. "I caged him like a bird in a cage," Sennacherib boasts, but the prism conspicuously omits any mention of Jerusalem's fall. For a king who prided himself on recording his conquests, this silence speaks volumes. The absence of Jerusalem's defeat aligns perfectly with the biblical narrative, which describes an extraordinary divine intervention sparing the city. The Assyrian army that approached Jerusalem was unlike any the city had faced. Numbering 185,000 soldiers, it was a force of overwhelming strength, equipped with the most advanced weaponry of its time. Siege towers, arietes, and lines of shielded infantry were the hallmarks of their campaigns. But their most potent weapon was fear. Rabshakeh, Sennacherib's spokesperson, epitomized this strategy. Speaking directly to the people of Jerusalem in Hebrew, he bypassed their leaders to sow panic among the common folk. His words, recorded in 2 Kings and chapter 18, verses 28 through 35, were crafted to break their spirit. "Do not let Hezekiah deceive you," he said. "Has any god delivered his land from the king of Assyria?" Rabshakeh's speech wasn't just a threat, it was an act of blasphemy, equating Yahweh with powerless idols. Rabshakeh's words were a calculated attack on the people's faith. By speaking in Hebrew, he ensured that every man, woman, and child within earshot could hear his taunts. He promised prosperity if they surrendered, saying, "Each of you will eat from your own vine and fig tree," but contrasted this with the horrors of starvation and death if they resisted. His ultimate goal was division, to undermine the people's trust in King Hezekiah and their God. Yet, Rabshakeh underestimated the resolve of Jerusalem. His threats may have echoed through the city, but so did the words of the prophet Isaiah, who boldly declared, "The Lord says about the king of Assyria, he will not enter this city or shoot an arrow here." Isaiah chapter 37, verse 33. This prophecy was more than reassurance. It was a divine promise, a direct challenge to the arrogance of the Assyrians. The stakes of this conflict extended far beyond Jerusalem's walls. To the Assyrians, every conquest was proof of their God's superiority. But in Jerusalem, they faced not an idol, but the living God, the creator of heaven and earth. The prophet Isaiah, speaking on behalf of Yahweh, framed the Assyrian arrogance as not just hubris against a nation, but an affront to the Lord of hosts. He likened the Assyrian forces to the mighty and many waters of the river, Isaiah chapter 8, verse 7, a flood that seemed unstoppable. Yet Isaiah reminded the people that even the greatest floods are subject to the will of God. For Jerusalem, this wasn't just a siege, it was a test of faith. Inside the city, the tension was palpable. With every passing day, food supplies dwindled, fear grew, and the weight of the Assyrian presence bore down on the people. Yet, under the leadership of King Hezekiah, they clung to hope. Hezekiah's response combined practical preparation and spiritual reliance. He fortified Jerusalem's walls, built the Siloam tunnel to ensure a steady water supply, and prepared weapons. But his greatest act of leadership was his call to prayer and faith. Hezekiah's trust in God set the tone for the city, reminding them that their deliverance would not come from swords or walls, but from the sovereignty of Yahweh. As the Assyrian army encamped outside Jerusalem, its banners casting long shadows over the walls, the people faced an impossible choice: surrender to fear or trust in the unseen promises of their God. The clash was not merely between armies, but between human arrogance and divine sovereignty. What happened next would not only deliver Jerusalem, but also echo through history as a testament to the power of faith over fear and the enduring greatness of the Lord of hosts. In an era when Judah faced not only external threats, but also spiritual decay, King Hezekiah rose as a transformative leader. His reign wasn't defined solely by power or political acumen. It was marked by an unwavering commitment to God's sovereignty and a desire to restore his nation's covenant with Yahweh. When Hezekiah ascended to the throne at the age of 25, he inherited a kingdom in disarray. His father, King Ahaz, had led Judah into idolatry, desecrating the temple of the Lord and promoting pagan worship. The nation's spiritual foundations were crumbling, and morale was at an all-time low. Hezekiah understood that no kingdom could stand without faith at its core, and he embarked on a mission to realign Judah with the principles that had once defined it. From the outset of his reign, Hezekiah's reforms were bold, deliberate, and deeply symbolic. The temple of the Lord, abandoned and defiled during his father's rule, became the centerpiece of his efforts to restore Judah's identity. In 2 Chronicles, chapter 29, verse 3, it is recorded that Hezekiah reopened the temple doors in the very first month of his reign, a gesture that signaled a fresh start. But his actions went beyond symbolism. Hezekiah called the Levites to purify the temple and reinstituted the sacred practices that had been neglected for generations. Perhaps his most significant move was re-establishing the celebration of the Passover, an event that had not been properly observed since the days of Solomon. This wasn't just a festival, it was a spiritual awakening. People from across Judah, and even remnants of Israel, were invited to participate, demonstrating Hezekiah's vision for a united and repentant people. Hezekiah's reforms didn't stop with worship. He took decisive action to eliminate idolatry, dismantling high places, breaking down sacred poles, and destroying the bronze serpent Moses had made, which had become an object of worship. 2 Kings, chapter 18, verse 4. This act highlighted Hezekiah's understanding that even symbols of God's past miracles could become idols if the focus shifted away from God himself. These actions were not without resistance. Many in Judah had grown accustomed to idolatrous practices, and reform often comes with opposition. Yet Hezekiah's unwavering faith and his ability to inspire others allowed him to overcome these challenges, transforming Judah into a nation more aligned with Yahweh's commandments. While Hezekiah's spiritual reforms were critical, he was also a pragmatic and forward-thinking ruler who understood the geopolitical threats facing Judah. The looming presence of the Assyrian Empire required not just prayer, but preparation. Hezekiah oversaw the construction of the Siloam Tunnel, a feat of engineering that redirected water from the Gihon Spring into Jerusalem, ensuring the city would have a reliable water supply during a siege. He also fortified Jerusalem's walls, repaired damaged sections, and constructed additional towers, as described in 2 Chronicles, chapter 32, verse 5. These preparations demonstrated Hezekiah's understanding that faith in God didn't negate the need for wise action. By balancing reliance on God with practical measures, Hezekiah set a standard for leadership that resonates even today. Hezekiah's greatest strength, however, was his ability to inspire confidence and faith in his people. When the Assyrian threats grew louder and the massive army approached, Hezekiah didn't respond with panic, but with prayer. Standing before the people, he declared, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of the king of Assyria and the vast army with him, for there is a greater power with us than with him." 2 Chronicles, chapter 32, verse 7. His words were not empty rhetoric, they were rooted in his deep trust in Yahweh. Hezekiah's leadership created a culture of resilience within Jerusalem, where the people could face insurmountable odds with unwavering faith. His actions prepared them not just for a siege, but for a spiritual test that would affirm God's sovereignty. As the Assyrian army drew closer, the tension within Jerusalem mounted. Yet, under Hezekiah's leadership, the people of Judah held to the belief that their deliverance would come not from walls or weapons, but from God himself. Hezekiah's story sets the stage for one of the most dramatic confrontations in biblical history, a direct challenge to Yahweh's authority by the most powerful empire of the time. How would this young king's faith withstand the blasphemies of Sennacherib and the overwhelming force of the Assyrian war machine? The answer lay in Hezekiah's unshakable belief that Yahweh alone held the power to save. The siege of Jerusalem by the Assyrian Empire was not merely a military confrontation, it was a battle for the hearts, minds, and faith of the people. King Sennacherib, at the height of his power, had swept through the kingdom of Judah, conquering 46 fortified cities, including the crucial stronghold of Lachish. With his army of 185,000 soldiers, equipped with siege engines and unshakable confidence, Sennacherib stood poised to claim Jerusalem. However, the Assyrians were not satisfied with physical dominance. They sought to win the battle before it began by undermining Jerusalem's spirit. This was the role of Rabshakeh, a high-ranking Assyrian official whose words became as sharp as swords. His speech, delivered in Hebrew, wasn't just a message. It was a psychological assault aimed at discrediting King Hezekiah and the God of Israel. Rabshakeh's approach was calculated and deliberate. By speaking directly in Hebrew, he bypassed the leaders of Jerusalem and addressed the common people, ensuring that everyone heard his taunts and threats. His first target was Hezekiah's credibility as a leader. "Fierce, do not let Hezekiah deceive you," Rabshakeh proclaimed. "He cannot deliver you from my hand." 2 Kings, chapter 18, verse 29. He mocked the king's reliance on Yahweh, comparing the God of Israel to the idols of other nations that had fallen before the Assyrian war machine. Rabshakeh's words carried the weight of countless Assyrian victories. Has any god of any nation ever delivered his land from the hand of the king of Assyria? 2 Kings, chapter 18, verse 33. This wasn't just an insult, it was a challenge, a direct attack on the sovereignty of Yahweh. The Assyrians didn't stop at ridicule. They painted a vivid picture of what awaited Jerusalem if the city resisted: starvation, suffering, and destruction. At the same time, they offered a false promise of peace and prosperity if the people surrendered, saying, "Each of you will eat from your own vine and fig tree." 2 Kings in chapter 18, verse 31. This tactic of mixing fear with temptation was designed to sow division within Jerusalem. Rabshakeh's message wasn't just aimed at discrediting Hezekiah, it was intended to make the people question their faith in Yahweh. The silence of the people in response to these provocations, as instructed by Hezekiah, 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 36, wasn't a sign of fear, but a testament to their trust in their king and their God. The blasphemy of Sennacherib reached its peak with the letter he sent to Hezekiah, a document preserved in 2 Kings chapter 19. In it, Sennacherib mocked Yahweh directly, asking why he would be any different from the gods of other nations. This letter wasn't just an insult, it was an act of defiance against the Lord of hosts. For the Assyrians, victory over Jerusalem would prove that no god could stand against their might, but they misunderstood the true nature of the God of Israel. Unlike the idols they had destroyed, Yahweh was the living God, the creator of heaven and earth. Sennacherib's arrogance, born from a long string of victories, blinded him to the spiritual reality of his challenge. Within Jerusalem, the people faced an almost unbearable tension. On one hand, they saw the overwhelming power of the Assyrian army, whose banners cast shadows over their walls. On the other hand, they had Hezekiah's unwavering faith and the words of the prophet Isaiah to sustain them. Isaiah had declared, "The Lord says about the king of Assyria, he will not enter this city or shoot an arrow here." Isaiah chapter 37, verse 33. This prophecy wasn't just a promise of deliverance. It was a direct response to Sennacherib's arrogance. For the people of Jerusalem, the choice was clear: trust in God or succumb to fear. The narrative of Sennacherib's siege reveals the true nature of spiritual warfare. The Assyrians relied on their military might, psychological tactics, and the assumption that their gods had granted them power. In contrast, Jerusalem's strength lay in its faith in Yahweh. The blasphemies of Rabshakeh and Sennacherib weren't just offensive. They crossed a line that no earthly power could cross unchallenged. This confrontation wasn't merely between two kingdoms, it was a cosmic battle between human arrogance and divine sovereignty. As the people of Jerusalem awaited Hezekiah's response, the stage was set for one of the most extraordinary demonstrations of God's power in history. When the Assyrian army, led by King Sennacherib, surrounded Jerusalem, King Hezekiah faced what seemed like an impossible situation. Yet, his response wasn't one of fear or surrender. It was a demonstration of extraordinary faith and humility. Hezekiah's actions during this pivotal moment set a timeless example of how to confront overwhelming challenges by relying on both divine intervention and wise leadership. Upon receiving Sennacherib's letter, filled with blasphemous taunts and threats, Hezekiah's first act was deeply symbolic. He entered the temple of the Lord, spread the letter before Yahweh, and prayed. This gesture, described in 2 Kings, chapter 19, verse 14, wasn't just a cry for help, it was a powerful acknowledgement of God's sovereignty. By laying the letter before God, Hezekiah showed that the battle was not his to fight alone. It belonged to the Lord of hosts. In his prayer, Hezekiah declared, "Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth." This wasn't merely a plea for deliverance. It was a proclamation of Yahweh's ultimate authority over creation. His prayer continued by asking God to vindicate his name. "Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord, are God." Hezekiah's humility and wisdom didn't stop at prayer. Recognizing the importance of divine guidance, he sent messengers to consult the prophet Isaiah, who was a steadfast voice for Yahweh during this crisis. Isaiah's response, recorded in Isaiah chapter 37, was both a promise and a prophecy. "He will not enter this city or shoot an arrow here. By the way that he came, he will return." This declaration directly contradicted the Assyrian boasts and reassured Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem that God had heard their prayers. Isaiah's prophecy emphasized that Yahweh's intervention would not only protect Jerusalem, but also humiliate the prideful Sennacherib, demonstrating that no earthly empire could stand against God's sovereignty. The reaction of the people of Jerusalem was just as significant as Hezekiah's actions. Despite the intimidating presence of Rabshakeh, who taunted and blasphemed in Hebrew to sow discord and fear, the people followed Hezekiah's command to remain silent. 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 36. Their collective silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an act of obedience and trust. This unity and restraint contrasted sharply with the Assyrian strategy of psychological warfare, demonstrating the strength that comes from unwavering faith in the face of adversity. Hezekiah's response also highlights the balance between faith and preparation. While he prayed fervently for God's intervention, he didn't neglect practical measures to defend Jerusalem. His leadership was marked by foresight, as seen in the construction of the Siloam Tunnel, which ensured a steady water supply for the city during the siege. He also fortified the walls and strengthened Jerusalem's defenses, as detailed in 2 Chronicles, chapter 32, verse 5. These actions weren't a sign of doubt, but of prudent stewardship. As the book of James, chapter 2, verse 17, reminds us, faith without works is dead. Hezekiah's preparation exemplified the principle that trusting in God inspires purposeful action. What stands out most in this account is Hezekiah's focus on God's glory rather than personal victory. His prayer wasn't driven solely by a desire for survival. It was motivated by a deep concern for God's reputation among the nations. By asking for deliverance, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord our God, Hezekiah shifted the narrative from a political conflict to a spiritual battle. This perspective teaches an essential lesson about the purpose of divine intervention. It is ultimately for God's glory, not just human benefit. As the Assyrian army loomed outside Jerusalem's gates, the tension within the city was palpable. Yet, Hezekiah's leadership had instilled a sense of calm rooted in faith. His reliance on prayer, coupled with practical action, prepared Jerusalem not just for survival, but for a demonstration of God's unparalleled power. The stage was set for a miraculous intervention that would not only save the city, but also reaffirm Yahweh's sovereignty in a way that would echo through the centuries. What followed next was nothing short of extraordinary, a divine act that turned the mightiest army of its time into a symbol of human frailty before the living God. As the Assyrian army, led by the proud and ruthless king Sennacherib, encircled Jerusalem, the tension within the city was almost unbearable. Imagine the oppressive atmosphere. 185,000 soldiers, renowned for their brutality and unmatched military prowess, stood ready to reduce the holy city to ashes. The people of Jerusalem could see the enemy's campfires glowing in the darkness, like a sinister constellation spread across the horizon. Yet within the city walls, faith burned brighter than fear. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic displays of divine intervention in history. The Bible recounts the moment with stunning simplicity. That night, the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. 2 Kings, chapter 19, verse 35. This brief statement holds profound meaning. Without a single arrow being fired, the mightiest army of its time was brought to ruin. The angel of the Lord mentioned here is often associated with God's direct and decisive action, appearing in other moments of deliverance throughout biblical history. For instance, the angel that struck down the firstborn in Egypt during the Exodus, Exodus chapter 12, demonstrated similar power. This wasn't merely a random act. It was a deliberate assertion of God's sovereignty over life, death, and the destiny of nations. At dawn, the scene revealed the full magnitude of what had happened. As the people of Jerusalem gazed out from their walls, they saw the lifeless forms of Assyrian soldiers scattered across the landscape. Weapons, banners, and chariots lay abandoned, silent witnesses to the devastating power of the Lord of hosts. The sheer scale of the destruction left no room for doubt. This was the work of Yahweh. The fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy, which declared, "He will not enter this city or shoot an arrow here," was undeniable. Isaiah chapter 37, verse 33. For the people of Jerusalem, it was not just a moment of relief, it was a profound affirmation that their faith in King Hezekiah's leadership and God's promises was well placed. The Assyrian Empire, which had terrorized the ancient world, suffered a humiliating blow. Sennacherib, who had mocked the God of Israel and boasted of his invincibility, was forced to retreat to Nineveh, his capital. There, his story ended in bitter irony. While worshipping in the temple of his god, Nisroch, he was assassinated by his own sons. 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 37. The contrast is stark. The king who defied the living God met his end before a lifeless idol. This chilling outcome serves as a timeless reminder of the dangers of arrogance and blasphemy against God. Sennacherib's fall was not just a personal defeat, but a divine statement that no human empire, no matter how powerful, can challenge the sovereignty of Yahweh. Beyond the immediate deliverance of Jerusalem, this event carried profound implications for the ancient world. News of the Assyrians' defeat would have spread quickly, reaching the ears of neighboring kingdoms. The sudden collapse of the Assyrian threat likely altered the balance of power in the region, buying Jerusalem time to rebuild and reaffirm its faith. The nations that had once feared Assyria's might would have marveled at the God of Israel, who had defended his people without the need for human intervention. This was a powerful testament to Yahweh's uniqueness among the gods of the ancient world. Unlike the idols of wood and stone worshipped by the Assyrians, Yahweh was the Lord of hosts, the creator and ruler of all things. For the people of Jerusalem, the lesson was clear. Their greatest defense was not their walls, weapons, or numbers, but their covenant relationship with Yahweh. This miraculous intervention was a tangible reminder that faith in God is never misplaced. It also reinforced the importance of Hezekiah's earlier reforms, which had called the nation back to true worship. The people's trust in their king and prophet Isaiah had been vindicated, and their faith in Yahweh was strengthened for generations to come. This event also resonates deeply with believers today. It reminds us that God's power is not limited by human circumstances. Whether we face overwhelming challenges in our personal lives, societal pressures, or spiritual battles, the story of Jerusalem's deliverance is a testament to the truth that, as the Apostle Paul wrote, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" Romans chapter 8 verse 31. The Assyrian army, with all its might, serves as a metaphor for the seemingly insurmountable obstacles we encounter. Just as God fought for Jerusalem, he promises to fight for those who trust in him. This narrative is also a humbling reminder of the consequences of pride and defiance against God. Sennacherib's downfall illustrates the biblical truth that pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18. His fate is a sobering warning to those who place their confidence in their own strength and dismiss the sovereignty of the living God. As the people of Jerusalem stood atop their walls, gazing at the battlefield transformed by God's hand, they witnessed more than a victory. They saw the fulfillment of God's promises and the validation of their faith. This was not just a moment of survival, it was a declaration of Yahweh's eternal sovereignty. The story of this miraculous deliverance invites us to reflect: how do we respond when faced with our own Assyrian armies? Do we rely on our own strength, or do we turn to the God who has proven his faithfulness time and time again? The miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem from the Assyrian army, orchestrated by the angel of the Lord, carries profound lessons that transcend its historical context. This event reveals the power of humility, the necessity of trust in God, the danger of pride, and the ultimate purpose of divine intervention. Through the leadership of King Hezekiah, the prophetic voice of Isaiah, and the direct action of Yahweh, we gain insights into how to face life's most formidable challenges. The first lesson is the power of trusting in God amidst overwhelming circumstances. When Hezekiah received Sennacherib's blasphemous letter, filled with threats and mockery of Yahweh, his response wasn't to panic or seek alliances with neighboring nations. Instead, he took the letter to the temple of the Lord and spread it out before God in prayer. 2 Kings chapter 19 in verse 14. This act of humility symbolized a deep dependence on divine power, placing the battle squarely in God's hands. Hezekiah didn't rely on his limited resources or the strength of his walls. He relied on the promises of God. In our lives, we often encounter challenges that seem impossible to overcome. Whether it's a financial crisis, a health issue, or a broken relationship, Hezekiah's example reminds us that true strength comes from acknowledging our dependence on God and seeking his intervention first. Another critical lesson is the balance between faith and action. Hezekiah's trust in God didn't make him passive. While he prayed fervently for divine intervention, he also took practical steps to prepare Jerusalem for the siege. His construction of the Siloam Tunnel, which ensured a water supply for the city, and his fortification of the walls demonstrated wise leadership. These actions were not a sign of doubt, but of responsible stewardship. As the book of James chapter 2 verse 17 teaches us, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. For modern believers, this means coupling prayer with thoughtful, practical steps, whether that's seeking medical treatment while trusting God for healing, or diligently preparing for a challenge while praying for guidance. Faith inspires action, and action reflects faith. The story also underscores the danger of pride and arrogance. Sennacherib's confidence in his military power led him to mock the living God, comparing Yahweh to the powerless idols of other nations. His hubris blinded him to the reality that he wasn't challenging a mere city, but the creator of heaven and earth. This aligns with the wisdom found in Proverbs chapter 16 verse 18. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Sennacherib's dramatic demise, assassinated by his own sons while worshipping in the temple of Nisroch, 2 Kings chapter 19 verse 37, serves as a sobering reminder that no earthly power can stand against the sovereignty of God. In our own lives, this calls us to humility, recognizing that all our abilities and achievements come from God, and they should be used to glorify Him rather than elevate ourselves. Perhaps the most poignant lesson is the power of prayer as a spiritual weapon. Hezekiah's prayer wasn't merely a plea for survival, it was a bold declaration of God's sovereignty and a request for His glory to be displayed. Hezekiah prayed, "Deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord, are God." 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 19. This reminds us that prayer is not just about asking God to fix our problems, it's about aligning ourselves with His purposes. It's about seeking His will and trusting in His timing. In a world where prayer is often treated as a last resort, Hezekiah's example challenges us to make it our first line of defense. Finally, this story reveals the ultimate purpose of divine deliverance, to glorify God and fulfill His promises. The defeat of the Assyrian army wasn't just about protecting Jerusalem, it was a declaration of Yahweh's sovereignty over all nations. Hezekiah's prayer focused not on personal gain, but on God's reputation among the nations. This teaches us that when God intervenes in our lives, it's not only for our benefit, it's to demonstrate His faithfulness and power to the world. As believers, we are called to live in a way that reflects His glory, allowing our victories to point others to Him. The lessons from this story are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. They challenge us to trust God in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, to act wisely while relying on His guidance, to walk humbly before Him, to wield prayer as our greatest weapon, and to seek His glory above all else. These principles offer a blueprint for navigating modern struggles with courage and faith. But how do we reconcile this miraculous intervention with the historical evidence surrounding it? What insights can we gain from archaeology and ancient records that confirm the events of this dramatic story? Let's explore these questions in the next section. The miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem during the Assyrian siege is not only a profound spiritual event, but also a historical moment supported by compelling archaeological evidence and ancient records. These findings not only validate the biblical account, but also offer us a deeper appreciation for the historical context of one of the most extraordinary interventions of the God of Israel. Let's delve into the wealth of evidence that corroborates this event and the lessons it continues to teach us. One of the most significant artifacts connected to this story is the Sennacherib prism, also known as the Taylor prism, discovered in Nineveh, the ancient capital of the Assyrian Empire. This hexagonal clay document contains Sennacherib's official account of his military campaigns, including his invasion of Judah. According to the prism, Sennacherib claims to have captured 46 fortified cities and trapped King Hezekiah like a bird in a cage within Jerusalem. Notably, the prism omits any mention of Jerusalem's fall or conquest, a glaring omission given the Assyrians' usual practice of meticulously documenting their victories. For a king as boastful as Sennacherib, this silence is deafening and perfectly aligns with the biblical narrative, which details his humiliating retreat after the angel of the Lord decimated his army. This absence of victory is a striking testament to the miraculous nature of Jerusalem's deliverance. Adding to the historical tapestry, the Greek historian Herodotus, often called the father of history, provides an intriguing account of an Assyrian military disaster. According to Herodotus, a plague of mice destroyed the Assyrians' weapons and supplies during a campaign in Egypt, leading to their defeat. While this story differs in specifics from the biblical narrative, it corroborates the idea of a sudden and unexplainable calamity befalling the Assyrian forces. This convergence of secular history and the biblical account, though not identical, highlights the enduring impact of the event on ancient memory and records. Archaeological findings within Jerusalem further illuminate the historical reliability of the Bible. The Siloam Tunnel, commissioned by Hezekiah to secure a water supply for the city during the Assyrian siege, stands as a testament to the king's foresight and leadership. This tunnel, carved through nearly 2,000 feet of solid rock, ensured that the city's inhabitants had access to fresh water even under siege. The tunnel's construction is described in detail in 2 Kings chapter 20 verse 20, and it remains one of the most remarkable engineering achievements of the ancient world. Visitors to Jerusalem today can still walk through this tunnel, connecting directly with a piece of biblical history. The fortifications of Jerusalem, also attributed to Hezekiah, have been unearthed by archaeologists. Excavations have revealed sections of the broad wall mentioned in 2 Chronicles chapter 32, which Hezekiah built to strengthen the city's defenses. These findings not only align with the biblical account, but also underscore the king's commitment to preparing both spiritually and practically for the challenges his people faced. Each stone of these walls and every inch of the Siloam Tunnel speaks to Hezekiah's balance of faith and action, a theme that continues to inspire. Another critical piece of evidence comes from the site of Lachish, a major fortified city in Judah that fell to the Assyrians during Sennacherib's campaign. Reliefs from Sennacherib's palace in Nineveh vividly depict the siege and capture of Lachish, showcasing the brutality and military might of the Assyrian war machine. These carvings, now housed in the British Museum, offer a stark contrast to the absence of similar reliefs celebrating the conquest of Jerusalem. The omission is not an accident. It reflects the failure of the Assyrians to subdue the city, further affirming the biblical narrative of divine intervention. The resonance of these findings extends beyond the academic realm. They serve as tangible affirmations of the events recorded in Scripture, bridging the gap between faith and history. The convergence of biblical texts, ancient records, and archaeological discoveries paints a vivid picture of the siege of Jerusalem and its miraculous deliverance. The God of Israel, who declared through Isaiah that Sennacherib would not set foot in the city, Isaiah chapter 37, verse 33, proved his sovereignty in a way that no artifact or record can fully capture. Yet, these evidences do more than validate the past. They challenge us to consider the implications for the present. What does it mean for us that the same God who delivered Jerusalem continues to act in history? How can these physical remnants of faith inspire our spiritual journey? These questions pave the way for a deeper exploration of how this story's lessons apply to the challenges we face today. The miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem under King Hezekiah is more than a story of the past. It's a roadmap for navigating modern life's most daunting challenges. In a world filled with uncertainty and conflict, this narrative offers enduring lessons on the power of faith, the necessity of action, and the transformative potential of spiritual leadership. Let's explore how Hezekiah's approach provides practical guidance for our own struggles today. One of the most striking lessons is the power of prayer as our first response. When faced with Sennacherib's blasphemous threats, Hezekiah didn't rally his generals or seek external alliances. Instead, he went to the temple of the Lord and spread the Assyrian king's letter before God, laying the crisis at his feet. 2 Kings chapter 19 verse 14. This wasn't a gesture of defeat, but an act of profound faith. For modern readers, this example highlights the importance of seeking God's guidance before taking any action. Whether facing a critical decision at work, a family crisis, or even a health scare, turning to prayer as a first step aligns our hearts with God's will. Imagine starting each day by surrendering plans and challenges to God, asking for clarity and strength. This simple yet transformative practice can shift our perspective and open the door for divine wisdom to guide our actions. Equally important is the balance between faith and preparation. Hezekiah's trust in God didn't render him passive. Instead, it inspired him to act wisely and decisively. The Siloam tunnel, carved through solid rock to ensure a steady water supply during the siege, stands as a testament to his foresight and determination. He also strengthened Jerusalem's defenses, rebuilt walls, and produced weapons. 2 Chronicles chapter 32 verse 5. This dual approach of trusting God while taking practical steps serves as a powerful model for us. For instance, someone praying for financial stability might also create a budget, seek financial advice, or explore additional income opportunities. Similarly, a person facing health challenges might pray for healing while also following medical guidance. True faith doesn't exclude effort. It inspires us to act with wisdom, knowing that God works through both our prayers and our actions. The contrast between pride and humility in this story offers a timeless warning. Sennacherib's arrogance, exemplified in his mockery of Yahweh, highlights the dangers of overconfidence and self-reliance. His downfall serves as a vivid reminder of Proverbs chapter 16 verse 18. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. On the other hand, Hezekiah's humility before God opened the door for divine intervention. In our own lives, pride can manifest subtly, whether in relying solely on personal abilities, dismissing advice, or neglecting to acknowledge God's role in our successes. By contrast, humility invites us to recognize our limitations and lean into God's infinite power. Consider the example of a leader who admits their need for help and seeks God's guidance in decision-making. This openness not only strengthens their leadership, but also fosters trust and collaboration within their team. Hezekiah's commitment to spiritual renewal underscores the importance of prioritizing faith, even in times of crisis. Before the Assyrian siege, he restored the temple of the Lord, re-established worship, and led the people in celebrating the Passover for the first time in generations. These reforms weren't mere rituals, they were a call to return to God. For us, this highlights the importance of creating spiritual rhythms in our lives, especially during challenging times. A family might choose to begin each day with prayer or scripture reading, while a community leader might organize gatherings to inspire hope and faith. Spiritual renewal isn't just about personal growth. It has the power to unite and strengthen entire communities, as it did in Hezekiah's Jerusalem. Finally, the story reveals the unshakable faithfulness of God. Despite overwhelming odds, Jerusalem was delivered not through human strength but because of God's covenant and promises. This assurance, echoed in Romans chapter 8, verse 31, reminds us, if God is for us, who can be against us? In today's world, where uncertainties abound from economic instability to global conflicts, this truth offers a solid foundation. Whether we're navigating personal struggles, societal pressures, or spiritual battles, Hezekiah's story invites us to trust in a God whose power and faithfulness remain unchanging. As we reflect on these lessons, we're challenged to examine our own lives. Are we prioritizing prayer, or are we relying on our own strength? Are we coupling faith with practical preparation? Are we leading others with humility and inspiring them to trust in God? These questions aren't just theoretical. They invite us to take specific actions that align with the principles demonstrated by Hezekiah. For instance, what would it look like to approach our daily challenges with both trust in God and intentional effort? How might we cultivate an environment of faith within our families, workplaces, or communities? The story of Hezekiah offers more than historical insight. It's a call to action. As we move forward, let's explore how the lessons of faith, action, and humility can shape not only our lives but also the lives of those around us. With this foundation, we're better equipped to face the challenges of today with courage and confidence, knowing that the same God who delivered Jerusalem continues to walk with us. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel to keep following more biblical stories like this one. Your participation is very important to us, and we want to hear your opinions and suggestions. May God bless you.